Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org. And Two Point Capital Management, an investment firm working with clients to create custom portfolios of stocks and bonds. Two Point is dedicated to helping people manage financial risk in good times and bad. More at twopointcapital.com.
Honest human stories. That is what we do at NPR, and we do it for you. Keep listening.
Here on WXXI.
Here at NPR, independence means journalism that's never influenced by politics, power, or popularity. It's reporting for you every day from NPR.
Listen here on WXXI.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Well, New York State finally has a state budget. Governor Kathy Hochul has touted the expansion of the child tax credit, along with what she calls an inflation rebate, $2 billion that will be distributed to New Yorkers in checks of up to $400 per family, $200 per individual. Every year there are fights over school funding, child care, taxes. This year, some of the conversation included if the state should be doing something in the event that the federal government makes dramatic cuts to Medicaid or other funding streams for states. We're having a series of conversations with New York State lawmakers about this budget, about the state's priorities, what they supported, what they wish maybe wasn't in the budget. And it's a chance for you in the audience to ask questions about how it all came together and what it means. Our first in the series of conversations, joining us from Albany, Assemblymember Sarah Clark from District Number 136. Assemblymember Clark, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be there. I wish I was in person.
No problem at all. I know it's been busy, and I want to start with the big picture. One thing that Speaker Carl Heastie, among others, have been saying is that essentially the state, at least right now, had to deal with this budget on its own. You can't just be trying to predict what Donald Trump or what the administration is going to do, what cuts may be coming, that you've got to deal with this now, and then you can deal with other federal issues later. Is that how you see it?
I do. I mean, we could all live in the what if. We could all live in sort of the noise of various, executive orders that have been signed or programs that have been cut. But so much of that is hard to actually understand what that means to New York, and is also working its way through the judicial process. So we had to sort of focus in on, our agenda, our revenue, where we were as a state in terms of, fiscal security and what we could come up with as a budget to just double down on our efforts to really focus in on our families. But I do think the federal landscape affected us in the sense that affordability for families, affordability for day-to-day was a main focus we all had in mind.
Well, I am curious to know what has been the most significant challenge for you as a state legislator since January 20th and since this new administration took power?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is the so much noise and the panic calls from a few folks who have actually truly lost funding and truly lost money. Even when there are judicial processes that are being filed in terms of, whether or not it's okay to take away this money through executive order, whether Congress has to be involved or not. The reality is, as that works its way through a system, places like Delphi Rise was, their federal grant was cut suddenly, with a week of notice. And, they do important 24-hour access work for those with addiction issues and are really a great partner in a whole big puzzle of agencies that are in that space. And to all of a sudden just lose money and try to figure out, what we can do and how we can help, given the fact that, if these cuts become reality, depending on how big they ultimately are, we don't have the resources to backfill that. So I think that uncertainty and then the suddenness by which really important agencies can lose money has been, a real struggle.
So looking at Medicaid as an example here, this budget, and I'm not great at math, Assemblymember Clark, you can correct me here. It looks to me like the expansion that New York State will allocate to Medicaid is pretty significant. It's double digits. I thought it was around 13% on the math I was doing year to year. And so, again, though, that's independent of what you expect from the feds. You're doing Medicaid based on what you think people in the state need for now. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's have to. We have a couple different programs also. We have an MCO tax that's supposed to raise us some revenue. We have the 1115 waiver that's giving us Medicaid dollars on top of the Medicaid expansion. And these are huge, huge numbers, huge investments. So much of our federal dollars are Medicaid dollars. But every piece of the healthcare system is struggling right now. And, we had to come up with a way to ensure we continued investment and continue to care for people. But, there's a lot of uncertainty ahead, and we are all a little bit nervous, I think.
All right, so we'll come back to the actual nuts and bolts, dollars and cents in just a second. I want to start with a question from a listener named Alex. He actually sent two, and the first, I think, is more of the big picture stuff that really is pertinent to what we've seen in the last few weeks. And, I don't know who is to quote-unquote blame for a late budget, but Alex has some thoughts. He says, while it's not as bad as it was in the 90s, Governor Hochul's sandbagging of the budget process, to say nothing of how opaque it remains, leaves legislators with less and less time to actually legislate. Will the Senate and Assembly push back more forcefully next year in the height of a primary season? That is from Alex. Go ahead, Assemblymember Clark.
Well, I think it was definitely a frustrating budget process. I wasn't here for some late ones. And every time, we would kind of mention it, the old days of making it to August came up a lot, which would be very painful. But at the same time, it is the latest we've had in 15 years. I think there was a lot of legislative language that was negotiated for weeks before we even got to, budget numbers, which I understand why the governor does it, but it does make for a process that is not easy and can really go longer than I think it needs to. When we come out with our Assembly One House, we try to take out as little, we put as little policy in it, only budget-related policy, no non-budget related, and that helps sort of, in our mind, negotiate, as we go along in the process. But, there were well over close to 200, I think, Article 7 languages from the governor and more from the Senate side, and it makes it a little trickier. And definitely, it was a very tough session, particularly those of us with families. For all of us, having to come back a bunch of times during recess and vote on extenders. It's just, it seems that there could be a better way, but I hope that we find some ways to maybe make the system a little bit better. If that is pushing back, then so be it. But yeah, this was, and he is very true that we now have this very rushed non-budget policy season to get a lot of priorities done, which isn't fun either.
Yeah. So do you agree with Alex's characterization that the governor was sandbagging this budget process?
I don't know if sandbagging. She had priorities, right? And her priorities come from a different set of listening to people and looking at, where folks are in the state and what they want and need and prioritize. We come from our districts, which, they're smaller and we're very focused in on what priorities are for our districts. So I don't know if it's sandbagging is the word, but it definitely creates a longer process than I think needs to happen. And it always feels like more of these conversations can happen off session so that we're more prepared to move things along so that we're not doing things through budget extenders. We're actually ready to roll on the budget quicker.
Yeah. And can you describe a little bit of when you say that, look, Alex is right, we do have less time to kind of focus on legislative priorities. I think there's so much attention on the budget that we might forget that there's a lot that you still want to get done here and focus on. now that the budget is passed. What is on the list that you say, boy, we really need to make sure we set aside time for X or Y?
That is the hard part, right? And there are a few key priorities that we've started to talk about that need to get done. Our central staff is sort of divided in two ways, right? So the team that works with us on passing legislation that's non-budget related is different than the budget related, those who are part of the Ways and Means team. But when you have so much policy in the budget, both teams are just absorbed, right, during the process. And during the negotiations, during the conversations about changing things. And now, so we've had a little less time during the budget negotiation to really work on our legislation, make sure it's in a good place, and prioritize based on the things we want to accomplish in our House. So now that's the question. How do we do that over the next 4 to 5 weeks? Now, I will say, as it's made news already, that our speaker has added 3 extra session days in hopes that we can make up some of the lost time, but it does mean longer days and a little more grueling. But that's what we're here for. So now it's about prioritizing big stuff. We're going to conference some of the big stuff around, whether it's the extended producer responsibility and figuring out a way to get more plastics out of our system, looking at other sort of climate change policy, better affordability around new forms of energy, whether it's the HEAT Act and other things. But then I continue, having my own priorities around some work we're doing around childcare as we continue that work and domestic violence and all, so there's sort of really large things that we have to conference and a huge assembly majority conference and prioritize. And then there's, some smaller things, but all of it takes time, right? You have to make sure you're changing the right law in the right way without unintended consequences. And so that takes a lot of review, and it's just frustrating that we have so little time.
Talking to Sarah Clark, New York State Assembly member from District Number 136. We can get back to your questions via email coming up, and you can email the program, connections@wxxi.org. Connections@wxxi.org. You can join the chat on the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube, on the WXXI News YouTube channel. And you can call the program toll-free, 844-295-TALK. It is 844-295-8255, 263-WXXI if you're calling from Rochester, 263-9994. So for you, Assemblymember Clark, what are the big headlines from this budget?
So, honestly, the top headlines for me, we made a historic investment in childcare. As you know, we've expanded eligibility for both income and the amount of dollars that we give to our providers who take families who receive subsidies. But that's put a huge strain on the system that didn't have enough money in it to begin with. So we put, $400 million more than we did last year. So a total of $2.2 billion into the childcare program. We still need more, shockingly. We've still kicked the can down the road in terms of really investing in the workforce. But it's an understanding of the fact that we want to be a leader in childcare. We want more families to be eligible for help. And to do that, we need to continue to invest in the system because it's more than just caring for our children. It's how we get our workforce. It's how businesses become successful. And so to know that sort of everyone's on that same page about how important childcare is great. I think for me, some really huge things are universal school meals, breakfast and lunch for every kid who walks into a school. We should be feeding our kids, right? There's so many reasons, even a town like Brighton, we had heard during the pandemic when universal school meals were part of the federal support that we were getting during COVID. And, they saw a 40% increase. A lot of those families, they may be on the edge. They may not be eligible for free or reduced lunch, or they may be too proud to apply for it. Whatever the reason may be, kids were eating that weren't eating before. And we need to do that. Like, that just needs to be a thing, that we feed our kids breakfast and lunch. And that was a big fight. We sort of expanded it over the last few years, but now we're at this point where I think everyone agrees. I think things like what we hear about housing and how incredibly important affordable and stable housing is for families. So we finally, through negotiation, convinced the governor on the Housing Access Voucher Program, at least as a trial. It's a 4-year program with only $50 million this year. I hope we can continue to increase it, but it is a recognition that people just can't afford their rent. They work hard all week. They may have one or two jobs, but they still can't afford their rent. And if we stabilize housing for those folks, so many different things improve. Mental health improves, education outcomes for children improve, workforce stability improve. It's finally a recognition of how important ensuring affordability, like long-term affordability, is for our families.
So let me ask a couple of questions about some of the things that you highlighted there. I want to talk about the child care. $2.2 billion is the total price tag this year. That's, as you said, $400 million more than last year. And again, I'm going to do some math here. That's like a 22% increase. That's huge. And as you say, it might still not even be enough, but it is a big, big increase. Now, what I want to ask you, Assemblymember Clark, is I've been reading a lot lately, and I'm sure we're going to kind of keep talking about not only the book Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, but also some of the concepts from the book, including economics writer Noah Smith's term checkism. And he says the Democratic Party does a lot of checkism, which is you pass a bill or you pass money for something, like the $34 billion for expanded rural broadband that the Biden administration touted in 2021 and then built almost nothing. And Noah Smith says you can't just tout the money. You have to show that you're going to put it into practice and help people's lives. And I know you agree with that. So when you look at $400 million more for child care, how does that get spent? How do you make sure that people access it? How do you make sure that the providers, there are enough people working to provide that?
Yeah, so I think the fact that we came into this budget cycle really wanting to focus on the workforce and understanding they're just incredibly underpaid. And it's the reason, I know one provider in Rochester alone who has 15 classrooms right now that he's licensed for that he can't open because of workforce. So that is definitely something that we were trying to really prioritize as top thing we needed to focus on. What happened is because we've increased eligibility, because we've done all this great work to ensure more families get subsidies, and we've done a lot of education and outreach to get people to understand that they are eligible, the program was oversubscribed compared to what we thought it would be. And we had a huge issue in the New York City market, and some of it is their own doing. But we already have 10 counties upstate who have had to go to waiting lists because they don't have enough money to support the families that are eligible and have applied, which means that there was a bigger increase than we even imagined. So I do think it's not only that we are getting the money out there and we're increasing the eligibility, but we are seeing more and more usages of this. I mean, families who are just getting by paying this huge bill every month are now paying a $400 bill every month. That is money in their pocket. That is real savings and a real commitment to understanding that we want them in the workforce if they want to be in the workforce. But it means that we as a state have to do more to support that.
Okay. When it comes to housing, you mentioned the Housing Access Voucher Program. And as you say, it's not a huge expenditure in this budget, $50 million. But you're concerned that too many people are working hard all week and hard all month and hard all year, and they can't afford, a decent place to live. It's so difficult. We know that the supply is a huge issue in the Rochester region. So I want you to talk a little bit more about how the Housing Access Voucher Program is supposed to work. But can I also ask you, are you concerned about what's happening in the state? Something is happening. I don't know if it's happening in localities. I don't know if it's a statewide issue. But we just can't build new housing. It's too expensive to build new housing. It's too difficult to build new housing. So we have a huge supply issue. We don't have much supply being added to the inventory. And I don't know if that's a state issue, but how do you see that?
So some of it is a state issue, right? We need to figure out whether it's localities that are, putting up roadblocks. Maybe there's more that we can do to incentivize. I know the governor has really done a lot around, housing communities and encouraging local municipalities with various carrots to get them to want to build more housing. So I do think there is a shortage issue. I will say one thing in the budget that we've been looking at legislation for the last couple of years to handle is this private equity issue, right? More and more private equity firms are buying up single-family homes. These are homes that are meant to be starter homes, meant to be, and it does multiple things, right? It keeps people out of a home, but it also drives up the affordability issue. And anyone who's tried to buy a house in the last couple of years, it's not just that you're bidding against other families, but you are bidding against these private equity firms who have all cash offers and are ready to roll, and often are getting their offers accepted. So I'm so happy the governor has taken this on. We've looked at other legislation. There may be more that I think we could do here, but that is a piece. And these are often not even being whether they're being rented for long-term leases or turned into short-term Airbnbs. It really puts a pressure on the market that we can't afford to have. But what the Housing Access Voucher Program will do is it's sort of our own Section 8 housing, which we've seen on the federal side is a huge success. It's just well underfunded, and there's thousands and thousands of people on the wait list for it. But it takes the percentage of income that you based on what you make to pay for housing, and then the voucher pays the rest. We know that this is one where landlords agree and property owners agree is a way to ensure that their tenants can afford it, right? We know the math. We know you shouldn't be paying more than 33% of your income for housing. Otherwise, you're financially upside down from day one. So how can we help? How can we support? That is the goal with the Housing Access Voucher Program, and to do it in state with its own parameters. But I think it'll go a long way. Housing stability fixes so many of the other things we struggle with, whether it's public safety, kids in school, and struggling families and jobs and holding down jobs.
Is there a scenario? Is there a scenario though in which a landlord knows that this voucher program exists and therefore raises rents commensurately, trying to take advantage of it?
Well, you see it in Section 8 housing, and I'm pretty sure Section 8 has some parameters around, sort of the rate that you can charge for rent based on the median and market factors in each region. So my assumption is that we'll do the same kind of thing to try to keep prices level. The city also just did its own version of good cause eviction, which does have a cap on the amount you can increase rent every year. The thing it does really well, which Section 8 does really well, is ensure safety of the house, ensure that the rental unit is up to code, right? And that people really should be living in this space. I think if you're getting guaranteed rent and you feel less that, the person you're renting to is going to struggle to make rent every month, then you can keep up with code, whatever the code is for that your rental units, and ensuring that it's safe for that renter to be there. So I do think it does a lot of good things, and I'm excited to see how it rolls out. But we have learned a lot from the Section 8 program, and I think we can make sure ours is modeled as successfully without, driving up rents more.
Okay. Talking to New York State Assembly member Sarah Clark from District Number 136, Cynthia emails the program to say President Trump is attempting to use price controls to bring down the cost of prescription drugs. Does the Assembly member think that this will work, and will it help New York State deliver more health care to people? So I don't know if a federal price control of prescription drugs will affect New York. Well, let's start with this. Do you think it's going to work? You've worked at the federal level. You've probably heard about this idea.
I mean, prescription drugs are a huge issue, the cost of them for so many of our families. I know even some of the work we had done in the Biden administration around lowering the prices of insulin and capping those costs. We here in New York State did our own version of that to ensure things like insulin are free for lower income families and that there's no copay. I mean, I hate to say, I hope it works, but I guess I do. Of course you hope it works. I just think if it were this easy, it would have been done a long time ago. And I don't know what the various factors, some of it is the prescription drug lobby and how much the take of the whole pharmaceutical system has relied on American the American system to fund it versus the other systems across the globe. So, I mean, sure, I'm all for something that will work. I'm not sure this is it. We will see, I guess. But if it were as easy to sign an executive order and lower prescription drug costs, I have a feeling it would have been done a long time ago. So
is it strange?
We'll wait and see.
Is it strange to observe at least your political opponents, the conservatives and Republicans, who have, as long as I've been alive, decried the dangers of price controls, endorsing price controls? Is that strange?
What has been strange? Accepting $400 million plane. I feel like
just
we're in
a
this
free airplane,
where,
Sarah. Come on, you would take a free airplane, no strings attached.
I know. I will just go back to a former boss of mine who may have gotten in trouble for being offered a $300 gift from another country, and so I feel like we're in this place where we have a lot of, if the person I like does it, it's fine. If the person I don't like does it, then I don't like it, right? And that seems to be a lot of where we're at on the federal side. And I'm not quite sure what to do with that because, my love and the reason I'm in this world is because I like the policy. I like solving problems. And when it matters more who's doing it than what's being done, I think we get into a little bit of a weird situation where becomes a little harder to solve things. Now, again, if people change and, some guy that I don't agree with, I definitely don't agree with our president right now on most things. But if he does do something ultimately that lowers prescription drug prices, I will be very happy because it is a burden too many families are struggling with.
We have to take our only break. When we come back, there is so much that we're going to try to squeeze in our remaining time with Assemblymember Sarah Clark. We're talking about the New York State budget that recently passed. We're taking more of your questions, listeners, for the Assemblymember. We're going to talk about reproductive health. We are going to talk. I want to talk a little bit about this bell-to-bell cell phone bans, and we got an email about that. The Office for the Aging is getting more funding. There's all kinds of stuff that's on the list here, and we'll come right back with Assemblymember Sarah Clark.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from the Levine Center to End Hate, presenting the second Concert to End Hate, featuring RPO trumpeter Herb Smith and his group The Freedom Trio in an evening of music and spoken word, Saturday, May 17th at 8 p.m. Location and information at endhateroc.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. My guest is Assemblymember Sarah Clark, joining us from Albany, talking about the recently passed New York State budget. And a lot to kind of move through, so we're going to try to hit a lot quickly here. On the subject of outside income, Assemblymember Clark, I know this isn't like a big sexy headline coming out of this year's work, but I'm just reading in the New York Times the following. In 2022, lawmakers placed a $35,000 cap on outside income. The Albany Times Union reported this year that nearly 40 legislators had outside incomes above the limit. The income cap was supposed to go into effect this year after several unsuccessful court challenges, but lawmakers included a provision in the budget that would delay enforcement for 2 years, end quote. Now, the Times story isn't, that's not the biggest part of their analysis, but I'm curious to know if, why you think this delay in enforcing an outside income cap is happening, and are you worried that it could erode public trust? I'm not hearing Assemblymember Clark. Hi, everyone behind the glass. I'm not hearing Assemblymember Clark. Okay. So we're trying.
I'm here.
Oh, there
I'm
we
here.
are. That's okay. It was probably our fault there, Sarah. Did you hear the question?
I did hear the question.
Okay.
And so the answer is, I think the reason the delay ended up happening is because initial courts had found that they were going to overturn this outside income ban. And so when people committed to outside jobs or whatever it may be, based on that lower court order, now that it's worked its way up through, it's gone in as that it is legal and it does pass muster, and we are ready to do it, given the fact that it was sort of tied to other things like the pay raise and things like that. So the goal was to allow people to finish out their term and rerun under this now new rule.
Okay.
So they can make the choice to run or not run. But we wanted to give people, not sort of change the rules so drastically mid-game, even though, we passed the law earlier, but because the court challenges were there and there was some uncertainty, I think allowing people to finish out this session and this term and decide for themselves based under these new rules whether they want to run again was the right thing to do.
Okay, but what it sounds to me like is you support and you think New York State will follow through with an outside income cap. You're just trying to offer a kind of grace period so people get used to the new rules.
Exactly, particularly given that we're in a 2-year term right now. It just sort of began, and it might put people in some really tough situations. So I was sort of for letting that grace period happen. That's a good way to describe it.
Okay. A bell-to-bell cell phone ban in schools is going to have its own conversation on this program soon, and the governor is now part of a list of governors of both major parties across this country who have endorsed this. Where do you stand on the bell-to-bell cell phone ban?
Well, it's nice when my kids aren't around for some of these answers. They may have their own opinions. I mean, overall, I really, really agree with it. I think we have a problem with phones in schools. I get it. I'm that same parent that wants to be able to get in touch with my child all times during the day. So this will take on my own behalf, on my own side, of a new adjustment. But I think it's needed. I mean, if you look at the mental health of our children, of our teenagers, we look at education, even testing and all the other things that we measure, our kids really need to be focused in on school when they're in school. There's a little wiggle room for each district and each school building to come up with their plan to do this based on their needs. And, we did some carve outs for children who are caregivers and other ways that they may need to get in touch during the day with family members. But it's a lot of pressure on our kids. And I think getting back to focusing in on the day at hand and the educational piece of why they're in school and maybe learning to talk to each other again and not just texting and Snapchatting when they're in lunch, I think is important. I think there was some initial talk of just doing educational time bans, but I think things like lunch and recess and other places that children are in more unstructured moments, I think it's also important for them to not have a phone then too.
Let me read an email from a listener who wants to understand an expenditure tied to this. Charles writes $13.5 million. That right there is one of the many reasons I can't stand the state. Would you like to know how much it actually costs to implement a cell phone ban in schools? $0. You tell the kid to put the phone in his or her locker during the school day, and if they don't do so, you confiscate it. You make the parents come get it back. You don't have to buy every student their own Faraday bag. But who am I kidding? This is New York, which means Albany thinks taxpayers are a bank, in his Charles' words, for stupid ideas. So he doesn't like spending money for this bell-to-bell ban. He's saying just tell students no cell phones. That's the rule. Why are we spending money on it? Is there an answer?
Well, I mean, I would say every district can do it different ways. I think the problem with, the one thing the bags do and whether people decide to, districts decide to purchase them or not is really up to them. There's so many ways to do it, but with smartphones or smart watches, if the signals aren't blocked, I mean, kids could still technically be on to some extent their phones if they're just in their lockers by the use of their smart watches. So, I think each district is going to really have to figure this out for themselves. I mean, other school buildings don't have lockers, so it's not a one size fits all. I think giving some resources to it was to not make it an unfunded mandate for those places in those schools where it's more challenging to implement. I would argue that some people would say that on the other side is that there might be a cost to a school and we're not paying for it as a state and putting that burden on the district, which will ultimately affect taxpayers in that district. So, I think it was a good combination of both ensuring there were some resources, but not an overwhelming amount. But for those districts that will need it.
Okay. Back to the phones. Bill in Rochester. Hi, Bill. Go ahead.
Hi. I was interested in the state programs you were talking about earlier regarding housing. And I understand you're trying to put in programs that will bring the cost of housing down. But the programs you talked about are all involved vouchers for different families. And it seems to me that would actually increase demand. And the rules of supply and demand teach us that as demand goes up, prices go up. So I'm wondering why the state thinks that for housing, the laws of supply and demand don't apply.
Assembly member?
So, yeah, sure. I mean, I think we do a couple things, right? Like, I do think we are trying to crack down on the private equity purchasing of homes. We've also in last year's session, did a statewide registry of homes and properties being used for short-term rentals, right? I know even like the town of Arundequoit is struggling with this in neighborhoods that used to be all families and all, owner-occupied homes are now having issues with more short-term rentals and various people coming in and out of their housing. So I think we've done a couple different things to look at some of the supply issues on that side of things. I think the Housing Access Voucher Program, again, it's going to have parameters around it of rates and market rates and the way we pay things so that there is some ability to ensure that we're not, that rents aren't skyrocketing. And again, the city of Rochester and any town and any community can do it themselves, but good cause eviction really puts caps on the amount that can be rent can be increased from year to year based on inflation and other factors, and costs of investments in those buildings. But it does put some guardrails around that whole sort of world of rent just going through the roof. I think we all are, and then of course building. I mean, that is supply is what we need to do. And I know the town of Arundequoit, I know the town of Brighton, these have all become pro-housing communities. And we're looking at ways to make sure other communities are doing that as well. But that is the second piece to this. And how we look at why it's so difficult to build housing and what the barriers are, I think we need to figure out ways to really ensure that we are getting rid of those barriers.
Bill, anything you want to add before we let you go?
Yeah. In terms of price controls that she mentioned, price controls have never worked historically, so I'm not sure why she's so confident they're going to work in the future. And also with regard to changing zoning to make housing easier to build, I think that's a good idea. But again, I'm not sure she answered the question with regard to why increase in demand with vouchers is going to work to curtail the cost of housing.
Okay, Bill, anything you want to add there, Assemblymember Clark?
Well, I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is, yes, there is no perfect silver bullet that I could do right now to make it better. I do think this is something that will step us forward. I think one of the costs that's in the market now is, when people can't afford, when there's huge numbers of people who struggle to afford their rent month to month, it causes issues with evictions and costs to landlords and costs to property owners and creates a more difficult system that also raises rents and makes it harder for people to get into places and to afford places and to pass background checks and credit checks and all the different things. But I think that's something else that we can solve through this a bit, and I think it will make a difference. Will it solve the problem? Will we still run into cost control? I mean, I guess we're going to have to figure out as we go. I just know that if you look at all the reporting around housing right now in Rochester, particularly the city of Rochester, affordability is the number one issue. And besides being able to wave a magic wand and have immediate, units added, we have to figure out an answer, at least a step forward, to make sure we're not setting people up for failure every day. I mean, these are people that work 40, 60, 80 hours a week and still can't afford their rent. What are we supposed to do in those situations?
Bill, thank you for the phone call. We're talking to Assemblymember Sarah Clark. Can you explain to people who will be getting a so-called inflation rebate?
Well, it's gotten a lot more complicated than the initial version. It's anywhere from $150 to a $400 check for families, and the various caps are Oh my gosh, I'm trying to read through them, but they're obviously dependent on your income, your filing status. So I will read you the exact parameters around it. So if you're a single income earner up to $75,000, you will get a $200 check. If you are a single earner between $75,000 and $150,000, you will get a $150 check. Those filing jointly with incomes up to $150,000 will get a $400 check, and those making between $150,000 and $300,000 will receive a $300 check. So there's sort of four pots based on your filing status and your income. And that went down by about $1 billion from the governor's initial proposal. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we had to really make an investment in childcare and a few other things that popped up along the budget negotiation process that became very, very high priorities.
The governor was big on this. Were you big on this?
I mean, in theory, I get it, right? Things cost more last year, so we received more in sales tax, and you sort of look at that and you say, oh, it makes sense that we should give some of that money back. It's hard because that program cost $2 billion. This inflation refund check program will be $2 billion. Again, it's not a $2 billion reoccurring that we're necessarily going to get year to year, so it's hard to start a new program. But are there other ways that we could have had meaningful impact on families? I probably could have come up with a couple ideas, but I get it. I get why we're doing it. People do like to get refund checks back from their hard-earned tax dollars that go into the state budget. So I have mixed feelings.
I can feel the ambiguity or the ambivalence, I should say, is pouring out of you about it. Okay, let me also ask you about reproductive health. And again, I'm going to read from the New York Times analysis. A new law specifies that abortion is considered protected emergency care when necessary to safeguard the life and safety of a pregnant individual. To strengthen access to reproductive health services, the budget allocates $20 million to allow providers to cover the full cost of medication abortion care and other abortion services. It also invests $4 million to fund abortion training programs for healthcare providers and $5 million to modernize facilities and ensure protections for providers from violence or harassment, end quote. Were you for this? And if so, tell us why this was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a staunch, supporter of pro-choice access for people who make those decisions. I think one of the other things we did was ensure Medicaid covered infertility treatment. So, it was many different ways that we are tackling both the maternal health crisis that we have, and particularly in some communities, to ensure access and affordability for those who are seeking abortions, better protections and trainings for those who work in the field. We have already seen, they tried to drop a lawsuit from another state on one of our providers here. So it is in some ways a dangerous world for those healthcare workers. And the training and all the work we do around our abortion clinics to protect and support is really, really important. This will always, to me, be a fundamental piece of women's health and ensuring people have the right to choose and make their own decisions. That's fundamentally where I stand on this. And so I think we need to do more, because it shouldn't be something that only people who can afford it or people who live in areas where it's easy to get to a clinic have access. We really need to ensure that there's equal access across the state.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little about taxes. I want to get back to Alex's second part of his email. In keeping with the theme that you mentioned, Assemblymember Clark, where up is down and down is up sometimes in modern politics, or at least politics of the moment, you have Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri, coming out and endorsing the idea that, there's these reports that behind the scenes President Trump is saying, no, actually, I'm going to raise taxes on wealthy Americans. We're not going to cut taxes again. We're going to raise taxes on wealthy Americans. And Josh Hawley saying, well, you should. They can afford it, and we should raise taxes on the richest and cut taxes on others. I don't know where the Republican Party will sort of settle out on that. Historically, Grover Norquist and others have had a big grip on conservatives when it comes to tax policy, as in no tax increases for anybody at any level. But Alex is wondering, how likely, as Assembly member, do you think it is that the New York State Legislature will pass increased tax hikes on Millionaire Plus earners rather than try and cut Medicaid through eligibility restrictions? So what would you say to Alex?
Well, I guess it ultimately depends on what the cuts are. We do have a strong rainy day fund that, although we took money out to pay the unemployment debt, which is a huge relief for small businesses and will ultimately be a relief if we have a downturn in the job market, because the rate that we pay, the maximum rate we pay weekly, will go up considerably. So we have done things like that from our rainy day fund, but we still have a strong one. So, I think we can take certain hits and can't take others. I do think on taxes we did do another round of lowering taxes for low and middle income earners that will start to kick in next year. But I will say, we raised the tax on millionaires $5 million and more 2 years ago. I'm trying to remember if it was last session or the budget before, but it has been a huge success in ensuring our state's financial resources that we have to come up with our budget every year. It has been successful, and we've seen that it gives us the more dollars to do the things that people care about: our roads, our schools, our housing, our childcare, whatever it may be. Is there an appetite for more? I mean, I think a lot of legislators are there. I don't think the governor is, but I think that will ultimately could change depending on where our financial hit from the feds comes in and how much it is.
Your office also shared some of the other priorities that have been big on your list. And for anybody who missed them, I just want to hit them pretty quickly, give you a chance, maybe a minute apiece here to talk about these. The first is direct cash support for new moms.
Yes. That has been something, it's a very modest program coming out this year, but it is at least an acknowledgement that when we give new moms at the moment that they become parents, particularly low-income families. We've seen this time and time again with direct cash programs. The Bridge Project is probably the most notable. They're in almost every community across the state right now. If we financially support at that moment when costs rise, when pressure and other health issues come into play and, the struggles are real, we can literally change the trajectory of that family from one that really struggles maybe for years and decades in terms of financial stability, and ones that can thrive and become financially independent, maybe even go off public benefits. And so I've been really advocating for that. This year there's an $1,800 direct cash payout for those who qualify. The one struggles I have is I'm not quite sure it's enough to make a difference, but and again, we don't need tons of money. The program we want was a total 18-month program that would cost around $7,000 for a family. So I'm not saying we need huge programs, but I think this one might not be quite enough, but it also requires a county share of 71%. So I'm not sure how many local governments are going to choose to opt in, given that they have to come up with their own money to do it. But it is a start, and we are acknowledging that is important. So that's good.
All right. Tell me about ending the wait list for seniors awaiting services.
So this is like the big push that we've had, carried the legislation to end wait lists. So seniors, often those who may be just outside the Medicaid, the ability to get Medicaid and Medicaid services, still struggle with day-to-day things, whether it's rides places, whether it's meals in the home, or whatever it may be that they need. And so we have started through the Office of the Aging this program to give critical services to those that group of older New Yorkers. And the waiting list has been huge. Talking, under 20,000, but still a lot of people on this list waiting to be able to get these services. We put a $45 million infusion into the program this year on top of what was already invested. I'm not sure if it'll be quite enough to fully clear it, but it's the first time in a long time that we've put a huge amount of money into understanding this makes a difference between whether people can stay in their homes, whether they're getting their basic needs met. And we are really going to be helping a lot of older New Yorkers.
Okay, down to about 90 seconds here. I know you also have your eye on local nonprofits in the wake of federal cuts. Tell me about that.
Yeah, we are trying to figure out ways that we can ensure, a lot of the good programs that we're working on. I think one of the key ones that we're doing, it's mostly the County of Monroe, but looking at the benefits cliff and how, we put a $3 million investment there to ensure, to study how we can help people sort of not drop drastically when their financial situation changes, so that we can maybe keep people in the workforce longer. I mean, if the decision is to work at this job where you're just getting by, but with the help of the public benefits, you can survive, and then all of a sudden you get a small raise and you're knocked out of all those public benefits, you may leave the workforce, or you may not take that next step up to a new job. And we should really be figuring that out, because if we can carry people through that, I think their success will be more. But, we're also looking at RMAPI and the great work they're doing, Systems Together, and other nonprofits that are committed to, trying to change how we do things and really, end poverty, decrease poverty, support families, and figure out ways to do better. Our nonprofits are the key. You'll hear more in the coming months of all the work we're doing to try to support some of them in our community that are really doing great work.
And give me your final 25-second elevator pitch. A new business is thinking about moving to New York State. They're looking at other states. This budget is now done. How do you convince new businesses? Why should they come here?
Well, my pitch to businesses always is that if I can take care of families and make life a little less chaotic and a little more easy for folks who live here, they're going to be able to show up every day to your job and your workplace. We now also have paid off unemployment insurance, so those rates will definitely go down, and we are looking out for other ways to help. But I think we're centering families so that workers and employers can do what they need to do in their businesses.
I know you're very busy and you're generous with your time. Sometime soon, let's come back and talk more about childcare. We'll talk about maybe the HEAT Act on a separate day, extended producer responsibility on a separate day. Those are all big things on their own. And
I forgot about the substitute pool for childcare workforce. That's exciting. We can talk about so much.
Well, we hope to do that soon, Assemblymember Clark. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Assemblymember Sarah Clark from District Number 136, the first in our series of conversations with state lawmakers about the recently passed New York State budget. More connections coming up.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, believing that everyone deserves to be cared for and to live well. Through community investments, partnerships, and education, Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield is working to address health inequities. More at excellusbcbs.com.